I'm Nicole.
And I'm Jackie.
And this is
Ghost to Coast.
I have something to tell you about yesterday. So you know how I don't own an iron or an ironing board?
Correct.
Also, there's just no way that I could fit one of those in here in my apartment. But a few months ago, I bought a steamer because I was like, if I don't own an iron, I at least need a steamer because I have clothes that are just wrinkled as fuck and I should take better care of my clothes. So I bought a steamer. I haven't used it until yesterday. And I spent like an hour steaming things that needed to be like de-wrinkled. Because usually I just like run the de-wrinkle cycle on the dryer thinking like, oh, that'll be enough. It's never enough.
I mean, I'm sitting here, my shirt's wrinkled as fuck, so...
Yeah. But like we're talking about like chambray pants that like you can't wear wrinkly.
Right.
You know? Because if you do, they look like trash.
Right.
My chambray pants came out wrinkled as hell. So I just ended up like steaming a bunch of clothes that needed to be steamed.
Nice.
Last night before I went to bed for the first time. It was really fun.
That's very grown up of you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I've steamed clothes on set before.
Sure.
Because, you know, it's video production and wardrobe usually has a steamer, or you have to bring, as a producer, you bring a steamer for the wardrobe. So I've steamed before. I've just never steamed my own clothes.
No, I totally get you. I definitely have ironed and steamed more actors' clothes than I have my own clothes. So...
Have I ever in my life steamed or ironed my own clothes?
No.
Never. Never in my life. Have I steamed and ironed other people's clothes? Yes.
Absolutely. 100p. This collar needs to be pressed for this performance. And meanwhile, I'm sitting in some like ratty ass black sweater that like has holes all over it. And I'm like, no one's gonna be looking at me today.
That's right. So anyway, I wanted to tell you about how I steamed my clothes for the first time yesterday.
I'm proud of you.
In my whole life, 28 years old, steaming clothes, baby.
I'm so proud of you.
So... should we get into this business?
Let's get into it.
Well, actually, Jackie, why don't you tell me what you're talking about?
Today, I am talking about bog bodies.
Tell me about them bog bodies.
Bog bodies. We're just going to jump into it. Bog bodies. Okay. So, bog bodies, you may have heard bog mummies before, too. So what are the bog bodies? Bog bodies are preserved bodies of people who were buried in the raised peat bogs of Northern Europe. Most of these bodies were discovered in Ireland, England, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. And the oldest found bog body dates to the Bronze Age, which is about 2000 before Common Era, or BCE. The majority of bog bodies actually date to the Iron Age. So between 500 BCE and 100 CE, or Common Era. And the reason why any of these bodies were found in the first place was because for a long time, peat was being cut and harvested in these bogs as a fuel source. Nowadays, peat isn't really harvested that much because it's an environmental issue. But these bodies have been found as early as the 18th century and as recent as 2014. Yeah.
Can you explain what a bog body is?
Okay, so a bog body is basically a mummy. They're these preserved bodies that were found in these peat bogs. And all of these people were buried here, and their bodies were preserved almost perfectly.
It's wild. If you've never seen a photo of a bog body, please look it up.
Look it up. It's wild. So what happens is the reason why these bodies are like this, these peat bogs in Northern Europe, are basically poorly drained basins, full of water and peat moss. And this moss, also called sphagnum moss, which is literally the type of moss like plant people recommend to use for your house plants, if they need to retain a lot of moisture. So the sphagnum moss is doing the same thing in these bogs, but just on a larger scale. Like there's just like swaths of land just kind of covered in water because this moss is just keeping all this water on this land. And so the land is basically drowning, and there's really few minerals, barely any oxygen, but plenty of acid in the ground. And all of these conditions mixed with like the really low temperatures in Northern Europe basically create like a refrigerator. So it's basically natural mummification. And the bodies are decomposing really slowly. And all the acid.
So wild.
Right? All the acid in the ground is like tanning the skin and the hair and the nails. If you look at a picture of a bog body, look it up, folks. Look it up. Like the skin is so dark. And it's just crazy. But the sphagnum moss also releases this carbohydrate polymer, which binds nitrogen, which slows and stops the growth of bacteria. But it's also so acidic that it's dissolving the bones. So it's dissolving the bones of these bodies, but it's also preserving the skin and the hair and the nails, even organs. Like, scientists can do so much, like, study on these bodies. There was so much information on these bodies. I couldn't even, like, get through it all, because if I got through it all, I would be there forever. But they have so much to study from these bodies because they're so well preserved. And they're so well preserved in such a way that some of them have like full facial features intact. Like you're looking at a human face.
Yeah.
That is so well preserved, it looks like it could just wake up at any moment.
There's the one guy, the famous one.
Right. The most well-preserved bog man is called Tullin Man, and he was found in 1950 in Denmark, I believe. And the family who found him saw that the face was so well preserved that they thought they had found someone who was only recently murdered. So much so that they brought in a detective to start a missing persons case until archaeologists were called in and they dated the body to like 2,000 years prior.
2,000 years old!
Right. But this body was
he looking fresh.
Right. He was so well preserved that, I mean, he looks flat as a pancake, right?
Right.
But his face was like, I'm looking at a picture right now. This is like my sleeping grandpa. Like, I can't. It's insane. I wish you all could see this picture. Please look it up. Look up the Tullin Man. Tulland. Like, wow. But there have been several of these bodies discovered around Northern Europe. And scholars speculate that there could be hundreds of bodies buried out here. So it like begs the question, why were these people buried out in these desolate bogs in the middle of nowhere in the first place?
Okay, question.
Yeah.
Was it that they were actually buried in the bogs?
Yes.
Or was it... Because I thought that it wasn't purposeful.
There were some that were purposeful, and there were some that, like, based on actually studies of their hair and, like, debris and matter and DNA in their hair, they could track where these people might have traveled. So some were purposefully buried in the bogs, and some were traveling and died in the bogs.
Gotcha.
And so, like, there's, like, it seems like there's an array of different types of circumstances that led up to these people being, you know, buried by moss.
Yeah.
And specifically the Tullen Man, because he's the most well-preserved, he's the one that I found the most information on. And they found him buried with a belt, a cap, and a braided leather rope tied around his neck. Also, just as a fair warning, I am going to talk about pretty graphic descriptions of death. But many scholars agree that the Tullen Man specifically was part of a ritual sacrifice. And the reason why he was buried in this bog most likely was because at the time, bogs were a sacred place in Northern Europe because most of the area was covered in forests except for bogs. So it was earth, water, and open sky. These places had the most access to the sky, which meant most access to the heavens or the spiritual realm. So bogs may have acted as a tomb, meant as like an immortal sacrificial resting place for human sacrifices.
Does it say anything about what the sacrifice was for, like what the ritual was?
So many of the bodies that were found suffered violent deaths, killed in some way, and many of them were either stabbed or strangled. But despite these violent deaths, many of the bodies that had their faces intact seemed almost serene, like they were asleep. It's speculated that these people were given up as human sacrifices to a Germanic goddess of fertility named Nerthus, who I might have totally botched that pronunciation. But the Germanic goddess Nerthus is the goddess of fertility, also called the Earth Mother. And she was often depicted with rings around her neck, which could explain why many of these people suffered strangulation in some way or another. And scientists even did studies of contents of food remaining in some of these bodies' stomachs that were preserved. And it was found that many were buried, most likely died and buried in the late winter or early spring, which could explain sacrifices to an earth goddess for a bountiful crop in the spring and the summer, which I found fascinating.
That is fascinating. I knew nothing about the like ritualistic side of it.
Yeah.
I feel like I definitely read something somewhere about some of these being human sacrifices, but I didn't know any of the background of why.
Yeah, it's
and
crazy.
Like who, like what it was for, or anything like that. It's for Earth Mother.
Yeah, it's for the Earth Mother. It's crazy. There were 2 bodies found in Ireland with which dated from like 400 to 175 before Common Era BCE, with mutilated nipples. And
fun.
It's theorized that these men were kings who failed in providing for their people. scholar named Eamon Kelly was the former keeper of Irish antiquities at the National Museum of Ireland, stated that, quote, sucking a king's nipples was a gesture of submission in ancient Ireland. Cutting them would have made him incapable of kingship. Some good old St. Patrick's Day information for you.
Oh, we love the Irish.
Yeah, it's
Don't
crazy.
Don't kiss the Irish. Suck their nipples.
Don't do it. Suck their nipples. Don't do it. But yeah, it's fascinating. And the main article I was reading from has so much more information to it. It's an article on the Smithsonian Magazine website. Check it out if you want to know more. But it's so fascinating. Just one looking at these people. I mean, their features are so clear that it almost...
The wrinkles.
Yeah, it almost is... It's weird to call them bog bodies because it really looks like they could wake up at any moment in time and like jump out at you.
Yeah, they just look like they're sleeping.
And just the whole process of it and how well preserved these bodies are, that these scientists can perform so many tests and experiments on them, and that they had been doing it at least up until like 2015, if not consistently after that. The article I was researching was written in 2017, so who knows if these bodies are still being tested on, but it's like they can, do CT scans and, all of these like skin tests and hair tests, and some of these bodies, including the Tullen man, had organs preserved, and they're doing tests on their teeth. So it's not just, it's not just external things like, oh, there's a rope tied around this person's neck, or this person was found with stakes driven through her elbows and knees, and right.
Okay.
They can do so much more science behind studying how these people lived and when these people lived, just because their body was preserved by a bog. And it's not known whether or not these people 2,000 years ago knew the science behind a bog and its preservation capabilities, because obviously they didn't have the science we have today and learning the decomposition process of a place like a bog. But there were other things found in these bogs along with these bodies. They found bog butter, which is literally butter that people
sound right.
buried in the peat to preserve.
Why?
I mean, for a long time before there was refrigeration, folks were burying food in the ground to preserve it.
And could they just excavate it and
knock
off the outside and it would be fine? I
mean, often they were kept in vessels of some sort. Like, it's usually just jars. So that it's makes
more sense.
I mean, obviously they didn't have like the health.
In my head, I was like,
it's like dirty butter.
A stick of butter. Just throw it in the ground.
I mean, at the same time, they didn't have like health codes we have now, so it could have just been a hunk of butter. Like, there was in 2017, a turf cutter in County Meath, Ireland, found a 22-pound piece of bog butter that dated back 2,000 years.
Oh my god!
And from the article, it seemed like it was just a hunk of butter that this man found. But people,
so crazy.
People were burying butter. People were burying animal fats. There were vessels found underground, weapons even. But so
they just put butter in the ground?
Yeah. Put butter in the ground.
Just like a 22-pound hunk of butter.
I guess so.
Said, okay, buddy, you're going to the ground now.
Going to the ground.
And you won't be found for another 2,000 years.
Right? I mean, some of the stuff buried along with the bodies were parts of sacrifices, but also some of it was just to be preserved for later, like butter.
Things I didn't know.
Right? I didn't know either. I mean, I knew about the kind of like storing process, like vaguely storing process of some foodstuffs. It's like I know a little bit about like, people, that's how people preserve like some fruits or meats, like drying them out and putting them in like underground storage, like cellars. But that I think is more we associate with like, a couple hundred years ago where people had cellars that they were putting food into because there wasn't refrigeration.
Yeah.
And not just like buried straight in the dirt. Which is crazy that these people 2,000 years ago were thinking of that. And like, even though they didn't have the science that we do now, they figured out
but somehow
something.
They just knew.
They figured out something about these peat bogs.
Yeah. That
it could keep something semi-fresh.
Yeah.
Preserved in some way. And I think it's hard to tell whether
and error, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard to tell whether or not the butter or the bodies came first.
Who knows?
Was it the butter or the bodies?
Okay, so like the bodies are staying, they're staying preserved. Maybe we can do this with food now.
Yeah. Or vice versa. They were like, this food seems great. Maybe if we stick a body in the ground, it'll be preserved.
I like the other way around, though.
Right. I mean, but you think about how we even treat burial and death today, and how there are plenty of cultures, plenty of people who really believe in that preservation process of a body. And now we have embalming. And it's a whole process, and it involves a lot
of... It's nasty and it's bad.
A lot of science. I know, I'm just burying the ground. Let me decompose. I don't even want to be buried in a peat bog. I want to decompose.
I want to decompose into the ground. Get picked apart by vultures and foxes.
Exactly. But, people were thinking about how... Perhaps they were thinking about how they could preserve bodies back then, and there was a spiritual aspect about it. The thinking about how these bogs, and it's like the picture in your head of a bog is always so spooky. It's always like,
I don't know. When I think of bogs, I think of swamps.
I think of spooky things, like really misty, like kind of gray.
Yeah, like a misty, desaturated swamp.
Yeah. But that these places were sacred because they were the only place in the area for these people that had open sky. And we think about now, like looking at the sky, we take that for granted. Like, especially since everything is cleared away for buildings and suburbs and cities. It's like, we can see the sky every day because we're not living in the middle of a forest. But these people 2,000 years ago were living in the middle of a forest, and they found these places that somehow were open, and they regarded it as a sacred place because it was the only thing around that gave them that opportunity for the sky. And so these deities that they believed in, they felt more connected to them in these places. And so they would perform these ritual sacrifices in these places and these burials in these places. And who knows if any of these people went willingly. I think it's so fascinating. It's fascinating that the bodies that were found with their faces and their expressions preserved, they're always described as serene, almost like they're sleeping. And like, despite the fact that they had very violent deaths, like they were discovered with marks of very violent deaths, and yet they seemed peaceful, which is such an oxymoron.
Yeah, it does make me think that they were willing sacrifices.
Yeah.
Though.
And the bodies that were found range from, children to like older men.
Oh, no.
There was a young girl found who was only 16. She's called the Yida girl.
Oh, we hate that. Only 16?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sad.
Yeah. But it's fascinating. I mean, if you want to read more, the resources I found were on the Smithsonian Magazine website. I also found a cool article on the Britannica website, 9 noteworthy bog bodies. So there you can see some pictures of some bog bodies. And also mentioned in the Smithsonian article was a book written by the archaeologist who studied the Tullen Man, whose name is Peter Wilhelm Glob, or Glob. I'm going to completely butcher his name. But it was called The Bog People. And it was written like around the time after the Tullen Man was found. And the Tullen Man was found in 1950. And I believe the book was written in the 1960s. So it is a little dated. But it sounds like a fascinating read regardless, because it was written by the man who was studying this bog body. And so it seems very cool, called The Bog People. But those are the bog bodies. And it's incredible thinking about how much these people have inspired artists.
Yes.
I read that there were poets who wrote about bog bodies. We have our forest king Hosier writing about bog bodies. It also kind of reminds me of the dead marshes in Lord of the Rings.
Ooh, yeah.
In Return of the King, when Frodo and Sam are walking through that marsh where all the like dead elves are.
Yeah.
And that's spooky. Like, that's what I was thinking about the whole time I was reading about
yes,
these.
Okay, marsh is actually a better term for what I think of than a swamp. Swamp's more like Florida, and marsh is more like Irish Highlands.
Right. This is definitely not Florida. This is definitely not Florida. Like I said, it's really... Part of the reason why these bodies were so well preserved was because it's really cold in these areas. Like, the temperatures played a key part in the preservation of these mummies.
Which makes sense, because they were trying to refrigerate things in the ground.
Right. But I feel like... I'm gonna regret saying this, but like, you find a body in a bog in Florida, it's gonna be decomposing. Like, it's gonna be bad.
Oh, yes. It will 100% be nasty as fuck.
Yeah. It's gonna be stank.
It's gonna be bloated. It's gonna have stuff coming out of it. It's not gonna be pretty.
It's gonna be bad. Like, I keep thinking about... I'm just thinking about...
The humidity.
I'm just thinking about dead fish now, and it's not a pretty picture in my brain. But yeah, those are the bog bodies. And they're crazy. Look them up. Just
Yeah.
You want to look?
I knew like what they were
Mm-hmm.
and like a little bit about them, and I've seen photos.
Right.
But I didn't know the whole entire background.
Right. I mean, along with like
what a bog was.
Like what a bog was.
I don't really actually know what a bog is.
That's a bog.
I just know that bodies stay fresh.
Bodies stay fresh. But if anything, look them up just to look at the pictures. Stare a bog body in the face for a little bit. It'll change your life.
Question your whole existence.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
And I'm here to freak you out.
Yeah, I am not excited.
Okay, so today I am talking about the black-eyed children, aka black-eyed kids, or BEK. And Jackie's never heard of this before ever, and I'm so excited.
No, I've never heard of it before. It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, and I do not do horror at all.
Well,
I'm a scaredy cat, so
get ready!
I'm ready for the nightmares. Here we go.
Okay.
Lay it on me.
So black-eyed kids are what they say on the tin, okay? They are kids, think that it's like a paranormal phenomenon. They're these children and they're always between the ages of 6 and 16.
Already hate it.
Who have pale skin, just like black eyes, like from lid to lid, black eyes. And sometimes people don't like see their eyes until they're like into an interaction with them. So that's what is really freaky. And usually they're either seen like trying to hitchhike, panhandling, but most of the stories that I have found have been them like showing up at people's cars. Or like
No.
Or their front doors.
No. That's worse.
Yes. So
tell me more, I guess. I'm scared.
The story really originated by an actual journalist out of Texas who like encountered this. And this was back in 1996.
Okay.
And this was like before any of the like Reddit no sleep was around. It was back before creepypasta. Like creepypasta wasn't a thing. Like Reddit no sleep wasn't a thing.
I mean, the internet was barely a thing.
Internet, right? Like the internet urban legend things like weren't around back then. Like we didn't have Slender Man. It wasn't like a big thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's why people think that this has like credibility to be like maybe something real instead of just like an urban legend. I think like what the most unsettling thing about it is that they're usually, I mean, there's a lot of really unsettling things, and I'll like go into stories from people who say they have encountered them. And some of them like I don't really think are real, but like the one from Brian Bethel, the guy in Abilene, I'm like, that seems kind of like a real thing that could have happened. The thing is, when you're just, like, looking at them, like, they just look like regular kids, you know? Like, which I think is probably the most unsettling thing. They're just, like, children, right?
Sure.
And, like, maybe, like, the only thing that people really notice about them is that they might be in, like, outdated clothes or just, like, in strange clothing that you wouldn't think a modern kid would be wearing.
Mm-hmm.
The major thing that, like, every story has in common about it is any time that they're encountered, they instill in the person who's interacting with them just this overwhelming sense of dread or fear or terror. and they're always like asking for something, like asking to be let into your home, asking for like a ride, asking to like use your phone.
No. No. No.
And they're always like very insistent and persistent and like getting what they want. There's not like a lot of stories about people who have actually let them into their house or anything like that. Because everybody's like, I don't want to know what would happen.
Nope.
Because I ain't trying to live like that.
Nope.
I ain't trying to be dead. Or have something happen to me.
No, thank you.
So let's get into the first story, which is the actual like testimony of Brian Bethel from back in 1996 in Abilene, Texas. So this guy, Brian, he was driving late one night. Also, it's going to be time specific. So you'll see what I mean by that.
Sure.
So he was driving late one night and he parked in a movie theater parking lot. Because he was like, oh, I gotta write a check.
Is this like a...
And I was like, honestly, I get it. Because if something happened, like maybe he was ADHD, you know, like he like something popped into his mind and he was like, oh shit, if I don't do this right now, I'm not gonna do it because I'm gonna forget. So he was like, all right, let me park over there in this movie theater and I gotta write this check out before I forget.
I hate what's about to happen.
So he's writing his check.
Great.
He's absorbed in the moment. He's chilling, and then all of a sudden he hears a tap, tap, tap on his driver's side window.
Nope.
Have you ever been doing something and somebody's tapped on your window? Because that's happened to me, and it's freaking terrifying.
I hate it.
Has that happened to you, though?
Like, once or twice.
And, like, that's just a normal-ass person, not a black-eyed kid.
And it's usually,
in the
like,
dark
someone...
at night.
It's usually, like, someone being like, are you gonna leave your parking space? Like, some person who, like, wants to park.
Yeah.
And you're, like, doing something, and I'm like, excuse you.
Don't touch my car.
Yeah. I'll run.
Anyway. So, he looks up to see these two kids, these two boys who have approached his car, and so he rolls his window down, and immediately felt, quote-unquote, this soul-wracking fear, which I'm just like, pass. But he couldn't explain it, because he was like, these are just two kids. Like, why am I so scared?
Right.
Like, I don't understand.
Right.
And then the older boy said that they wanted to watch a movie, but they forgot their money at home. So he was like, so could you give us a ride? And I'm... In my head, I'm like, what? It's dark. It's late. You want to see a movie? And you think that some stranger is going to give you... You're two kids asking for a ride home to grab money so that same stranger can bring you back to a movie theater to watch a movie?
Like, why not just ask for money?
Right? I'm like, that's sus. This is when it gets really weird. And so the kids elaborated and said, it won't take long. We're just two kids. We don't have a gun.
What?
Like, I'm thinking these are just people playing at being kids. Like, they're not real kids. They've just, like, seen what a kid looks like and, like, how one would act and, like, is trying to act that way, but are bad actors.
Right.
I'm horrified at this point.
That's when you roll up the window and you drive away.
So, at this point, he's unnerved because why would you bring up a gun, son? And also, like, took stock that the last showing of the film that they had talked about wanting to see had already started. And then, like, by the time that he would take them anywhere and brought them back, the movie would be over. So he's, like, making excuses and kind of, like, questioning the situation. And also noting that, like, anytime he broke eye contact with them, which he'd already seen their eyes, you know, like, he was already like, something's weird. These kids have oblong eyes.
So he's acknowledged that these kids have completely black eyes.
Yes.
Like, you can't see the whites of their eyes at all?
No.
Oh my gosh.
They have no whites to their eyes.
I hate it.
It's just like a black void.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah. And so, but also he's noting that, like, anytime he breaks eye contact with him, the fear that he had already been feeling just becomes completely all-encompassing and, like, debilitating. So, but when he explained about the movie and, like, started being, like questioning them, being, like, making excuses, like, I don't think this is gonna work out, the older kid started to get frustrated, and he was, like, getting impatient, and then he said, "We can't get into the car unless you say it's okay."
No.
And that's when he said, "Fuck this," and just left.
That's demon shit. No!
Right? Yeah. He was like, I don't think so. And
thank you.
Just, like, zoomed out of there. And I'm like, that's probably the best decision you've ever made in your life.
Yeah.
Sir.
So, like, are these kids, are they, like ghosts?
Okay,
Or
so yes.
They seem
Let's
like real
get into
kids.
the theories. This is what I, like, really fascinates me, is that nobody, like, knows what these things are. And there's, like, a million theories, right? Let's list some of the theories. So conspiracy theorists think that, like, which I don't really understand this one, but that they're aliens trying to reach out to their Earth. And I'm like,
Sure.
I mean, I could see it because it does feel like I had said before, like, it feels like they're playing at being at kids.
Right. Like, they don't exactly know what a human child
right
is like, but they have,
so,
like,
they're just, they've only, like, seen it in their peripheral or something.
Sure.
And they're just like, this is a human child, right?
Although, if these are aliens trying to get back to their Earth, why are they asking people to use their phones or, like, for rides in cars?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, but, like, the whole asking for permission to do things.
Yeah, I hate that.
Feels very much like the stories you hear about demons and shit.
Yeah, so another theory from the demonologist side of things thinks that these are literal children of the devil.
Oh.
Like, letting them in or, like, doing what they ask is allowing the devil into your life.
Right.
I think that's very feasible because everything that they do is, like, very demon-esque.
Right. From what I've heard of, like, demonology and just demon encounters versus ghost encounters, it's a lot of, one, often children, like, demons will disguise themselves as children.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that in horror movies too. Like, it's so common in, like, demon lore that it even happens in, like, a lot of horror movies. But they're disguising themselves as children, and it's a lot of asking permission and that kind of exchange.
Yeah.
Whereas just ghost encounters or, like, apparitions, you may see something, something may move, you may feel things, you may hear things, but it's not like a permission access kind of thing.
Yeah. Some people do think they could be ghosts, but I don't think it's very ghost-like.
It seems very much like demon shit to me.
Yes.
Especially the whole black eyes things. And so these encounters, like, these people felt like they were just looking at regular kids, right? They weren't like some ghostly color, like...
No, like, they looked like normal children.
Whatever.
No, they looked like normal human children besides the eyes.
Which is terrifying.
Right?
I hate that.
And, like, ghosts don't usually show up fully formed.
Right. Like, if you can see a full-bodied apparition, like, that's an event.
Like, you're a privileged son of a bitch.
Yeah. Like, I'm waiting for that day, man. And then, like, also, like, the dread, like, the projecting emotions onto someone.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
I don't like it. So, another theory, which I can understand, I don't think this is correct, but people think that they could be vampires. Because they're asking to come in, and the one kid was like, we can't come in unless you say it's okay.
Huh.
Which is a vampire thing.
See, I don't know that much about vampires, because I know more...
Jackie.
I know more about ghosts. And...
You don't know, like, classic vampire lore?
I know Twilight, which is...
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'm the worst.
I mean, we love Twilight in this house, but as cheesy as it is, also as toxic as it is.
Oh, hella toxic.
That's not real vampire lore. That's not classic.
I know onions.
That's not...
And wooden stakes.
Well, now I know that I have to talk to you about vampire lore.
Yeah, man, we need to do a whole vampire episode.
I have to do a vampire episode, and I have to tell you about where the lore even started. Like, it didn't even start with Vlad Dracula. Honestly, it started with tuberculosis. That
tracks. Like, that makes sense to me.
Everything goes back to disease.
I mean, you're coughing up blood and shit, like...
Oh, now I can't wait to tell you about that. Okay.
Tell me about vampires.
But yeah, so a classic vampire lore thing is that they can't cross a threshold into your house until you let them in.
Mm.
Also, they have to be invited in. So, like, invited in, let in, to be let into your personal space, your personal property, I should say.
Right.
But yeah, so that's where the vampire theory comes in, because they're like, we can't come in without your permission.
Right.
But it's also very demon-y.
Right.
So I think the consensus here is that the BEK are demons.
We don't like it.
Or demon-esque.
We don't like it. We don't want them.
I don't want to encounter them.
No.
I don't want to be seeing them.
No, thank you.
I don't want nothing to do with them.
No, no.
So I hope you sleep well tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for that one. I will treasure it forever.
All right. So that wraps up this episode of Ghost to Coast. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Ghost to Coast Pod. You can also check out the show notes at our website, ghosttocoastpod.com. And eventually we'll have a Patreon that you can go check out. But we'll announce that whenever that goes live. So thanks for listening and stay spooky.